Junior's tears weren't love. So what were they? Because if that scene felt like a tender moment, the show already fooled everyone. Tony doesn't walk in asking about the hit, the indictments, or the medication. He walks in and asks the most humiliating question a grown man can ask another grown man. Don't you love me? And Junior, this lifelong professional at turning feelings into insults, doesn't answer. He just sits there, eyes filling up, like his pride finally ran out of oxygen. Here's what matters. Those tears aren't proof of affection. They're proof of recognition. In 1 second, Junior sees the full damage report. Decades of cutting remarks. That varsity athlete cruelty repeated like a hobby. The way Tony's been begging for approval without admitting he's begging. The fact that Tony even has to ask is the evidence. And that's before the real horror kicks in. Junior's mind is slipping. He's losing the memories where love used to live. He's watching himself disappear, while the only person still trying to pull something human out of him is the nephew he betrayed for power. So no, those tears aren't romance. They're guilt. They're fear. They're the moment a man realizes he spent his whole life choosing pride. And now he can't even remember why. The moment lands with the elegance of a blunt instrument. Tony, a grown man who has threatened, bribed, and brutalized his way through life, stands in front of his uncle and asks, "Don't you love me?" Not, "Did you do it?" Not, "Why did you try to have me killed?" Not even, "Are you taking the medication?" Just that simple, humiliating plea for confirmation that there is something, anything, human left between them. Junior answers the only way a man like Junior can when language would require self-knowledge. Silence, tears, and the faintest tremor of recognition. It is not a sentimental beat. It is a verdict. On the surface, it is easy to reduce Junior's tears to pride, an old-school patriarch marinated in the belief that affection is weakness and tenderness is a kind of surrender. Uncles, in this worldview, are supposed to dispense criticism like cough drops and call it character building. The varsity athlete insult, repeated with the devotion of a liturgy, becomes the perfect emblem of that posture. Petty, needling, performed for dominance rather than truth. Even in a relatively calm visit, even with a doctor explaining that strokes and cognitive deterioration can twist behavior into something uglier than intended, Junior still manages to be mean on reflex. Tony even names the absurdity of it. If the condition can make Junior repeat things, why is it always the cruel things that get the encore? The question is less medical than moral. The man cannot stop choosing contempt, so the body obliges him by making it his default setting. And yet the tears do not read like a man savoring his superiority. They read like a man being cornered by an emotional fact he can no longer outmaneuver. The line, "Don't you love me?" does something that courtroom testimony and power struggles never managed. It forces Junior to see the damage plainly. Tony's neediness, his insistence on approval from the one elder he still half respects, becomes evidence of the wound. The very fact that the question has to be asked is an indictment. It implies a lifetime of withheld praise, of affection rationed as if it were contraband, of approval dangled and then yanked away. Junior's tears can be read as the sudden realization that he has failed, not only as an uncle, but as the closest thing Tony ever had to a stable father figure. When a nephew has to beg for love, the adult in the room has already lost. That is the tragedy of Junior's particular brand of masculinity. It equates love with vulnerability, and vulnerability with humiliation. This is not strength. It is emotional illiteracy dressed up as tradition. Junior's attachment to reputation, his obsessive guarding of dignity, his terror of looking ridiculous, turns every relationship into a negotiation, and every tender moment into a threat to his standing. It is why he can do kind paternal things in practice, playing catch, taking Tony to ball games, giving advice, showing up in ways a deadbeat parent might not, while still refusing to say the words that would have made those gestures land as love instead of duty. He can throw a baseball. He cannot throw an honest sentence. The tears, then, are not merely sadness. They are the consequence of a lifetime spent treating affection as something to hide, until hiding is all that remains. Of course, the show refuses to let anyone enjoy a clean interpretation. Junior's mind is slipping, and that matters. The clinical detail, the mini-strokes, the foggy wandering, the doctor's explanation, hangs over the scene like a second script. Junior is not merely stubborn, he is deteriorating. There is a particular cruelty to the idea that he is literally forgetting that he did love Tony, that even the memories that could redeem him are being erased by a disease that does not bargain. In that light, the tears can be read as a rare flare of lucidity, a man briefly aware of his own erosion, seeing the end approaching, recognizing that whatever he feels now will soon be inaccessible, even to him. That awareness is not poetic. It is panic with manners. And it makes Tony's question land as something more than emotional blackmail. It becomes a cruel timing accident. The man is asked to account for his love at the exact moment his brain is making love harder to access, harder to name, harder to perform. Yet the tears are also tethered to guilt. And guilt is not a symptom of dementia. Junior ordered a hit on Tony. That is not a misunderstanding or a misplaced jab about athletics. It is a choice that drags an entire ethical universe behind it. A man can love his nephew and still decide that power and pride matter more. That is, in fact, the point. Junior's tears can be the brief moral clarity of realizing what was traded away for this thing of ours. He gave his soul, piece by piece, to a system that rewards suspicion, punishes sincerity, and turns family into leverage. In the cold arithmetic of that life, love is a liability. Junior accepted that logic, played by its rules, and in doing so became the kind of person who could authorize murder while still insisting he had principles. Watching him cry after the question is asked is watching the last remaining part of him that still understands the contradiction. The varsity cruelty carries an extra sting because it is so unnecessary. It is not strategy. It is not business. It is emotional vandalism performed for sport. There is an especially bleak implication that Junior's undermining may have helped steer Tony away from legitimacy, away from any alternate identity that might have given him dignity without violence. Maybe Tony was never going to be a shortstop for the Mets. Maybe the small hands line is an insult wearing a joke's hat. But the pattern matters. A young man desperate for approval gets mocked instead. A young man who might have imagined a different life learns, repeatedly, that his worth will always be contested and his achievements will always be minimized. In that sense, Junior's cruelty does not just hurt Tony's feelings. It helps cement the very insecurity and rage that make Tony so suited to the life that ultimately destroys him. The tragedy is almost comically self-fulfilling. The older generation complains about the younger generation's brutality while actively shaping it. There is also resentment, and it is not one-sided. Junior's relationship with Tony is a knot of love, rivalry, and humiliation. Tony is not merely a nephew. He is the living reminder of Junior's brother, a substitute son, and a constant measuring stick. At the same time, Tony is the man who outmaneuvered him, used him as a shield, and watched him get paraded as a boss in name, while the real power moved elsewhere. Junior's bitterness about being made to look foolish is not imagined. He experiences his own life as a long campaign for status that ends with him holding a title that functions like a practical joke. When Tony shows up asking for reassurance, it can sound, to Junior's raw nerves, like one more twist of the knife. Another demand, another accusation, another reminder that even in decline, he is being evaluated by the person who eclipsed him. The tears can come from that suffocation. An old man with no tools left, trapped between loving someone and hating what that someone represents. And then there is the sheer existential inventory that the question provokes. Junior is old, alone, facing prosecution, watching his mind fray, and confronting the obvious outcome of a life built around control. The ending is control's absence. No wife, no children, no stable companionship. Just the echo of decisions justified as necessary, now revealed as optional, and worse, pointless. The occasional reflection on his life, summing it up as being surrounded by death, with no family to cushion the fall, hits because it is mundane. It is not a grand mobster punishment. It is ordinary isolation. A life spent cultivating fear ends with nobody left who can safely love you. And even the people who might have tried have been trained to keep their distance. The question, "Don't you love me?" does not merely ask for affection. It forces Junior to confront what he built and what it produced. A man in a room, clutching dignity like a relic, discovering that dignity does not keep you company. It is tempting to romanticize the "we used to play catch" motif as proof of something pure. It is proof of something, but not necessarily purity. It proves Junior was capable of showing up in a child's life. It proves Tony's longing has an origin rooted in real moments. It also proves that the most meaningful emotional currency between them is a memory of childhood. Because adulthood, for men like these, is an arena where tenderness gets classified as weakness and promptly executed. "We used to play catch" becomes the safest form of intimacy. Nostalgic, indirect, and conveniently immune to accountability. It is what men say when they want to confess love, without risking the indignity of sounding loving. It is not nothing. It is also not enough. Underneath all this is the show's consistent diagnosis. Machismo is expensive. Everyone is shrouded in it, and it costs them everything with the slow efficiency of compound interest. A character even articulates the obvious. Many of their problems could be solved by talking, by hashing it out, by saying plainly what they want and what they fear. But nobody goes first, because being first means being labeled soft, weak, unmanly, and therefore exploitable. So the men perform toughness until they forget what they were protecting. Junior's tears are the rare glitch in that performance. He is forced into a moment where he cannot posture his way out. The system has trained him so thoroughly that even when the path to peace is obvious, acknowledge love, admit resentment, negotiate respect, he cannot take it. Pride seals his mouth. Tears leak out instead. Junior's intelligence only sharpens the tragedy. He is not a simple fool barking one-liners. He is quick-witted, strategically aware, and often perceptive in a way the more muscle-bound crew members are not. His capacity for sharp, spontaneous remarks is not just comedic garnish. It signals a mind built for rapid pattern recognition and social control. That is why his decline is so brutal to watch. The very qualities that made him formidable, mental agility, verbal precision, an instinct for reading a room, are exactly what Dementia dismantles first. The audience is not asked merely to pity an old man. It is asked to watch a capable man become incapable, to watch a personality hollowed out, while the shell remains upright enough to keep taking hits. This is also why the debate over his choices carries heat. There is an argument that he was not a bad uncle at all, that he did what he could, that he provided time and presence, that he offered guidance, and that Tony's machinations made him look ridiculous in a world where ridicule is fatal. In that view, Junior's attempt to assert himself as leader was not vanity, but an expected succession. Tony should have waited his turn, supported the older man, and exercised patience the way he advises others to do. There is also the harsher counterpoint. Whatever mentorship Junior offered, he ultimately prioritized ego over family and authorized violence against the very person who sought his approval. Both readings can be true because the relationship is not a court case. It is a mess of affection and betrayal that refuses to be simplified into hero or villain. The tears sit exactly at that intersection. Love does not erase the hit, and the hit does not necessarily erase love. It merely reveals what love is worth in a culture that prices it low. Junior's romantic life, or lack of it, adds another layer of bleak irony. There is a rational argument embedded in his bachelorhood. Bringing a spouse and children into that life is unfair, dangerous, and morally grotesque. When death or imprisonment is always on the menu, pretending domesticity can be kept clean is delusion. In that sense, refusing marriage can be framed as the closest thing these men have to an ethical stance. And yet the show twists the knife. Avoiding family may spare others, but it also guarantees that the man himself will end alone, with no built-in circle of care when the body fails and the mind fractures. The right choice, by mobster standards, still leads to an ending that feels like punishment. It is not noble solitude. It is the logical outcome of a life built on compartmentalization and fear. The woman he loved, the one who loved him back, is lost because pride required distance and secrecy. The lesson is unromantic and precise. Refusing vulnerability is not the same thing as avoiding pain. It is merely choosing a slower, lonelier version of it. And what of the women orbiting this world? The ones expected to absorb the consequences with tasteful silence? Their lives are not exactly advertisements for the life Junior avoided. Some are left with husbands who cheat, vanish, get killed, or become burdens in ways that feel like a cruel parody of marriage vows. Others end up widowed young, or tethered to ties that never truly release them. Material comfort exists, ornaments, houses, status, but it sits beside a constant undertone of fear and compromise. The question of whether any of them would have been happier with a respectable, boring alternative is less a moral puzzle than an indictment of how thoroughly the mob life contaminates choice. Even when a woman chooses it, the menu is rigged. Junior's singleness can be seen as sparing a potential spouse that trap, but it also underscores the show's recurring mockery. The men build empires and still cannot secure a peaceful kitchen table. The comparison of fates, Junior's slow dementia versus another mobster's prison death from cancer, reveals how the show weaponizes endings. One fate is physically brutal and lucid, the mind intact enough to understand the humiliation, the loss, and the approaching finish. The other is psychologically brutal and prolonged, a steady erosion where accomplishments become meaningless because the person cannot remember them, where loved ones become strangers or threats, where identity itself dissolves. It is not obvious which is worse, and that is the point. The mob fantasy promises control, and both endings strip it away differently. The man in prison suffers the certainty of decline with full awareness. The man with dementia suffers the theft of awareness itself, along with the indignity of being warehoused, forgotten, and summarized by the smallest possible phrase. That's nice. 2 words, spoken without malice, still managed to crush an entire mythology. There is an argument that Junior did pretty well by the standards of his profession. He lived into old age, avoided flipping, outlasted peers and successors, and died more peacefully than most. In a life where the likely outcomes are dead or in the can, reaching 70 can look like winning. He even had enough money at points to pay extraordinary legal costs, which is the mob equivalent of having a retirement plan. But calling it a win requires a very selective definition of success. Living longer does not mean living better. Outlasting everyone only matters if there is something worth being around for at the end. Junior's longevity becomes another form of irony. He survives the dangerous decades, the internal wars, the betrayals, the indictments, only to be undone by biology and left in an institution where power means nothing and memory is not currency. This is why the writers beat up on Junior complaint almost misunderstands the show's intent. The point is not to punish him for entertainment. The point is to demonstrate the futility of his lifelong pursuit. He coveted power, chased the title, and finally got it in the most insulting way possible. A ceremonial crown with no real authority. Then he loses even that. Then his body betrays him. Then his mind erases him. It is not gratuitous, it is thematic. The show insists that living can be the punishment, that there is no need for metaphysical hell when a man can create his own through decades of violence, paranoia, and emotional starvation. A mobster expects a dramatic end. Bullets, sirens, prison bars. Junior gets something worse for a man who worshipped control. He loses control of his own thoughts. Even the show's occasional dark comic flourishes around his decline. Public stumbles, humiliations, the farcical necessity of pretending to be impaired until impairment becomes real, serve the same idea. The world Junior inhabited treated weakness as shameful. The universe responds by making weakness unavoidable and public. It is not subtle, but subtlety was never Junior's style. When he watches television and confuses what he sees with people from his own life, it is funny in the moment and horrifying in the aftertaste. The mind that once ran rooms now cannot reliably separate fiction from memory. The show does not mock him so much as expose the fragility behind the swagger that everyone pretended was invincible. What makes the "Don't You Love Me" scene endure, though, is not the medical realism or the thematic architecture. It is the emotional geometry between two men who cannot confess what they feel without turning it into a contest. Tony is not a pure victim in this relationship. He manipulates, humiliates, and controls. He uses family as a tool when it benefits him, and calls it loyalty when it flatters his self-image. Junior is not a pure monster. He shows genuine care in moments and cannot fully extinguish his attachment. The scene is devastating because it is not about whether Junior loves Tony in some abstract sense. It is about whether love can function in a world built to strangle it. Junior's tears suggest that love exists. His silence suggests it has no usable form. Tony's question suggests that even love, when it is starved long enough, becomes a demand rather than a gift. And then there is Tony's final look. One of those gestures that audiences dissect because it feels like a whole thesis compressed into a glance. One reading sees Tony holding back tears, grieving the loss of the only elder he could truly confer with, the last link to a world where guidance and kinship still meant something. Junior's confused attempt to resume old patterns, asking whether there was business to discuss, lands like a ghost trying to negotiate. Tony declines, not out of cruelty, but because he finally understands that meaningful conversation is gone. The glance back becomes an acknowledgement of an era ending, and of Tony's isolation deepening. Another reading is colder. The look is relief, even jealousy. Junior gets to exit life in a fog, forgetting the worst of what he did, spared the full weight of conscience. Tony, fully aware of his own monstrosity, senses that his ending will not be so merciful. The glance back, in that interpretation, is not mourning. It is appraisal of an exit that looks, perversely, like mercy. Both readings fit, because Tony is the kind of man who can feel grief and envy in the same breath. He can mourn Junior as family, while also resenting the possibility that Junior's mind will erase guilt in a way Tony's mind never will. He can pity him and fear him. He can love him and remember the hit. The show's genius is that it never forces a single clean emotion. It lets contradictions coexist because contradictions are the whole point. These men live by contradiction. Family first, unless power requires otherwise. Honor, unless convenience intervenes. Respect, unless ridicule is more satisfying. Love, as long as it never sounds like love. So what does Junior's tearful silence mean? It means everything that pride prevented him from saying when words still worked. It means he recognizes, however briefly, that he hurt the person who wanted his approval most. It means he senses the collapse of his identity as boss, uncle, man, and mind. It means he is caught between resentment and affection, between humiliation and nostalgia, between the urge to comfort and the terror of appearing soft. It means he understands, perhaps only for a second, how much he gave up for the life, how a soul can be traded away in small installments until the remaining balance is a pair of wet eyes and no language to explain them. And it means the show, with its usual ruthless politeness, is reminding everyone that the grand mob narrative always ends the same way. Not with glory, but with emptiness. Sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, sometimes reduced to 2 words that accidentally summarize an entire existence. That's nice. Subscribe for more breakdowns where the body fails, the mind folds, and the myth collapses.